Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you today to record episode 23, which is the exact halfway point of the Dancing the Dream book. There are 46 pieces in the book, and this is episode 23, in case you couldn't do the math yourself. Needless to say, I'm thrilled. This marks a halfway point in the journey of the book itself, as well as roughly a halfway point for season 1 of Reading Michael Jackson. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not sure what season 2 is going to be. I have plenty of ideas, and I don't want to get ahead of myself with making too many plans, but I do know I enjoy doing this way too much to stop doing it after season 1. So, needless to say, there's plenty of season 1 left for us to love and enjoy, plenty of this book left to read and take from and learn from. But I still wanted to acknowledge this very big and very large feat. If you have not listened to all of the previous episodes, if this is your first episode to join for Reading Michael Jackson, then welcome. But if you've been here for a bit too, then you know we have covered a full wide range of topics and perspectives from Michael. And just to kick us off here on this halfway point, let's just briefly review some of the themes that we have been talking about this whole year so far. The first episode debuted in January, so it is now late May, and we are still chugging along here. So at this point, we have read 22 pieces from Michael Jackson, and these pieces have covered all kinds of themes. To start us off, I reviewed the book up until this point so far, and just some of the ideas Michael has touched upon include destiny and legacy, spiritual evolution, dance, art, and creativity, unity, social equality, and global concerns, purity, innocence, and the power of children, animals and the earth and the planet, the environment, self-esteem and self-worth, consciousness and higher power and faith. And of course, amid all of these things was one episode about Michael's mother. So we have had a wide range of topics and perspectives, and I want us to be thinking about that as we go into this second half of the book. I want us to be thinking about how Michael has called this book more autobiographical than his actual autobiography, which in some ways makes sense when you consider the way the books came together, the time frame of their publication. I mean, it is difficult to write a memoir or autobiography in your 20s. It's very difficult. It may be even more difficult if you're working with a publisher and it's a huge book deal with a lot of attention. Moonwalk, which is Michael's autobiography, is a great book in its own way. I mean, I really enjoy it, and perhaps we'll talk about it in season 2. But Dancing the Dream was written in a very different way, and in a lot of ways is more Michael than Michael telling his own story, because the themes and ideas he talks about here seem to come directly from his heart, rather than maybe the need to recount, stories from his life specifically, or tell, a chronological biography of his existence. So I like that Dancing the Dream is a different type of autobiography. I think it'd be cool to think about And I know this is the teacher in me, but if you were to write a book that is representative of you, but not necessarily about you all the time, what kind of themes would you be writing about? I mean, again, Michael does talk about some directly personal things, but as you know, as you've read this book, as you listen to this, he doesn't always. A lot of them are more universal themes or things he is intellectually and spiritually very invested in. So I guess that's what I'm saying. Without feeling like you have to divulge personal details of your life, what could you write about that would feel representative of you on a thematic level? Just something to contemplate. There's no answer. And we're not actually going to talk about it, but I find it interesting and it makes me want to think about how I might write something that feels autobiographical, while on the surface, to most reading it, they may not necessarily see that right away. Needless to say, I can drone on and on about how much I'm appreciating this book so far, especially as I read it in a slower, more methodical way. But I'd like us to get into this episode and this piece because this is the halfway point in the book. And I think it's notable that the piece we're reading today was selected to be the halfway point in the book. So with that said, it is a very short piece, but I'd still like you to get comfortable, get cozy, and hang out for this reading as we read together the halfway piece in this book, the 23rd piece. And it is called How I Make Music. How I make music. People ask me how I make music. I tell them I just step into it. It's like stepping into a river and joining the flow. Every moment in the river has its song, so I stay in the moment and listen. What I hear is never the same. A walk through the woods brings a light, crackling song. Leaves rustle in the wind, birds chatter and squirrels scold. Twigs crunch underfoot, and the beat of my heart holds it all together. When you join the flow, the music is inside and outside, and both are the same. As long as I can listen to the moment, I'll always have music. Okay, so I know this is a very short piece, but oh my God, I have so much to say. I know, I don't know, how is it possible? I don't know. I have so much to say. I don't know where to begin. Okay, so first of all, I love this piece. As a writer, I know my own creative process, and to some degree, I know my creative philosophy, but I also teach creative writing. And just now, I've asked students to, for a final, write their own creative philosophy. And that's what this reminds me of so much. And it's very brief, of course, but there's so much here that when you read it just silently to yourself, I think it would be very easy to just be like, oh, that's nice. What a nice approach Michael has to making music. And then you'd move on to the next piece. But this is one of the pieces that I love having the opportunity to break down more in depth, because I think there's a lot here. So first of all, I want to address what I think is a really important part of this conversation about Michael making music. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you are either a massive Michael Jackson fan, or you know me, and you're interested in what I have to say about things. Or somehow you ended up here and you don't know how or why. Welcome, if that's the case. But I bring this up because obviously serious Michael Jackson fans know that Michael was an incredible musician. But if you're a casual fan or just listening because you're my friend, you may not know this. So I am going to share when I first became a fan of Michael, when I first decided to deep dive in his discography. I was shocked when I discovered that he wrote a majority of his music. I did not know that. I assumed, like is the case with many pop artists, that Michael was an incredible dancer and singer who was an outstanding performer, but mostly worked with other people's songs. I did not expect that he was a creator of his own work. I just didn't know. I didn't know. So if you are someone who did not know, then now you do. Michael wrote a significant amount of his own music, both lyrically as well as the music itself, despite not playing any instruments at an advanced level. Although there's of course rumors he played a little bit of piano, a little bit of drums. He didn't play on an advanced level to my knowledge of any instrument, but he wrote every part of his songs. He talked about this several different times, but it's also been confirmed by countless people who worked with him that Michael would hear music in full form in his own mind and recreate the different parts for various instruments by kind of translating the sounds from his mind out for musicians to learn and play. And that was one of the processes he used to write music. I had no idea. So when I discovered that this insanely talented man was also creating the compositions and composing full multi-section instrumental pieces in his mind, it completely blew my mind. And it gave me a completely different level of appreciation for Michael. Something that's kind of a fun fact, I think, is that in his career, Michael had 13 number one hits. Now, 13 is a very high number, but it's only his number one hits. So when we're talking about top 10 hits, that number is much higher. But I believe he had 13 number one hits, and 7 were self-written. And I think that's pretty incredible. And for example, when you look at like Thriller, the biggest songs off of Thriller, Beat It and Billie Jean, were both written by him. So needless to say, Michael has proven himself over and over to be an incredible songwriter. But again, I don't know that that is actually common knowledge, to be honest. And it pains me when I see comments on YouTube or like on a Facebook reel or something, and someone says, oh, he didn't write his own music. He was a great performer though, or he wasn't a musician, but he was a performer. Well, that's just simply not true. And it's not reflective of the reality of his process or of any of the musicians who did work with him, who routinely called him a musical genius and witnessed it themselves, and all attest to this. So all of that said, I love that we can actually discuss this piece because it's so important. I think that Michael's fans, but also anyone learning about Michael Jackson, that they understand that he was a legit musician on top of all the other amazing things he was. So with that said, let's talk about the piece. I absolutely love this piece. I love how it's written. I love the approach he takes to discussing his creative process. Something I want to note here is that I think often when people ask an artist or a musician or a writer, how do you do what you do? While yes, we're seeking some insight into their inspiration, often though, I think as admirers of work, we confuse creative process with product. So we're listening to an incredible song by Michael Jackson, and we're hearing a final, polished, perfected product. But for Michael or any artist, the creative process looks very different than the final product does. So I think sometimes when we ask the question, how do you do what you do? We might be expecting a different kind of answer than what Michael gives us here. And I'm grateful for the answer he does give us here, because this answer to me is so much more honest, because it's speaking about the true creative process of inspiration and tapping into that and then blossoming into a product eventually. Now, if you've been following Michael for a while, then you are more than likely familiar with some of the other times that Michael has famously spoken about his creative process. However, not everyone revolves their entire life around Michael Jackson like I do. So, with that said, if you are not familiar with the 1993 Mexico Deposition, as it is often called, then you are in for a treat, and I highly recommend you search this out on YouTube. But let me give some context. So in this piece, Michael is talking about how he makes music, and he's describing an almost ethereal process of stepping into a river, joining a flow, connecting with the world, and then hearing music. This is a beautiful, spiritual, symbolic kind of, it's like a creative philosophy of joining the world and letting it flow inside of you and hearing what it offers and then translating. So I bring up the Mexico Deposition because in 1993, Michael Jackson was being sued by someone who had accused him of stealing songs and claiming that he had written them himself when he did not. And this was not true. And so while Michael was on the Dangerous World Tour, while he was dealing with oral surgery, while he was dealing with a host of other very well-known legal battles, he had to also deal with this lawsuit in which he had to, while in Mexico on tour, give a deposition about his creative process in order to prove that he was in fact the writer of these songs. Now, spoiler alert, he did win, and he won in part because of the convincing way in which he discussed his creative process. It's an incredible resource. If you're a super fan like me, you have listened to it 100 times. But if you're normal, you either have never heard of this or haven't listened to it to the degree that I have. And so I do recommend you listen to it again, because in that deposition, Michael is asked specific questions about his creative process. And the only kind of answer he could give is just like he writes here. Steps into it, joins a flow, he hears it in his head, he can't explain it, it comes to him, it's a gift from God. You know, it's this way of viewing his own role as a creator so differently than how we're used to thinking about it. So like I said earlier, when we ask people this question, we often want to know about the end product. How did it become this thing? But what Michael's telling us is about the spark at the beginning of the process. So the difference in how Michael answers this, both in the deposition itself as well as in this piece, is that he's not exactly taking credit for it. He is instrumental to the process, but he's not taking credit for the creation itself, because in both places, and we'll focus for now on this piece, he is acknowledging the universal music that's already in existence. I think this is a really unique way of talking about creation and talking about music. It's this idea that it all already exists, and it's up to him to tap into it and access it. I've always thought of when he describes hearing music in his head and then trying to put it down on tape or trying to record it in some way as a sort of translation. And I don't know if that's how he would term it, but I'd be really curious if that would feel accurate to him. Within this episode, I'd like to play a couple of short clips of different times Michael has discussed his creative process. I think it's really relevant to the way he's discussing it here. And so one of the first clips I think of is actually from the 1987 Ebony Jet interview, which I know I've referenced multiple times on this show. But there's a clip when he talks about the process and where the music comes from. And I want to play that here.
How long did it take to come up with, I guess you almost wrote 8 songs or 7 songs on it. How long did it take to come up with that creative process?
I don't remember. I totally don't remember. I don't even count the hours or anything. Mm-hmm. Every song is different. Sometimes it happens quickly, sometimes it happens slowly. No one can quite say what the creative process is, because I have nothing to do with it almost, because it's created in space. It's God's work, not mine.
Another favorite song of mine is not as much as Man in the Mirror, but Liberian Girl.
Yeah.
Is there a Liberian girl in your life?
No, I wrote that at my house in the game room. I guess I was playing some pinball or something, and the song just popped in my head, and I think I ran upstairs, put it on tape, and it became Liberian Girl. Same thing with We Are the World, We Are the Children. I didn't really, I don't know why those words came. They just came as that. We are the ones to make a brighter day, so let's start giving. I didn't think about it. Just comes.
What's so notable to me is the way that Michael is not taking credit. Like I said, it really seems like he thinks of himself more as a conduit rather than someone who is, sitting around and trying to develop an idea. And so this is really consistent with other things Michael has said at different points in his career. So I've referenced the 1993 Mexico Deposition, but during that deposition, they actually play an audio recording of Michael writing the song The Girl Is Mine. And in that, you can hear him not only singing the different instrumental parts for the strings and for the horns and the drums and the beat, but you can also hear him talking through his process to himself. And he says, "Don't write the song, let the song write itself." And I don't know that that would make sense to everyone, but it does make sense when you think about Michael's creative philosophy, which is that he is simply stepping into what already exists. So it is not up to him as one individual man, regardless of how brilliant he is. It is not up to him to create something from thin air. It's up to him to accurately represent what he is able to hear and tap into that perhaps no one else can. So now thinking about this piece and how he wrote it, he talks about stepping into a river. Every moment in the river has its song. So I stay in the moment and listen. So if you think about creativity and music as a constant flow that exists, that he could step in and out of, it almost makes you think that, okay, well, the specific moments of time in which he stepped in and created some amazing song was representative of just that particular time. Had he stepped in at a different time, he would have heard something else. We maybe wouldn't have songs like Billie Jean and Beat It had he stepped in at a different time. Not to take it too literally, what I love about this metaphor is that it works so well. Every moment you show up for anything in life, the circumstances are different. The context is different. Who you are changes from day to day and moment to moment, not necessarily on an extreme level, but who you are that day, your mood, what you've experienced, how you're physically feeling, all of that shapes the way you can see and hear and understand the world, right? So in this creative process for Michael, stepping into the flow, it's kind of like a crapshoot, But that goes along with what he says here. What I hear is never the same. And that makes sense because not only is the flow of the river, so to speak, always changing, but so is he. But here's what I really love. He then gets into this very sensory, auditory explanation of what he hears if he's walking through the woods. So for example, the sounds of twigs breaking underfoot, the sound of birds chattering, leaves rustling in the wind, all of these particular sounds. And I remember hearing somewhere that he described the sounds of birds and nature around him like a symphony. Something I find really interesting that is not directly related to Michael, but it related to this concept as a whole, is I've been learning more about neurodivergence that can really affect the way you experience senses. So you might have a different level of sensitivity to light or sound or anything like that. So there may be people who are in the same room, in the same place, and one person hears a very particular sound, and another person not only doesn't hear it at the same volume, but perhaps doesn't hear it at all. And it's not so much about auditory ability as it is how these senses are actually experienced. And now I'm not saying Michael is neurodivergent. I have not the slightest clue about if he was or was not. But a person who hears a symphony in all of nature is likely experiencing sound differently than the average person. And whether that is genius or something else, it's certainly something Michael did have. The ability to hear sounds that other people did not hear, to hear them as music and not simply as sound, is also a type of genius. And Michael famously was really interested in taking everyday sounds and incorporating them into music. I know that he talked about this with the Dangerous album, with Invincible, with wanting to go out and discover new sounds to incorporate into music. So non-traditional sounds, not from traditional instruments. And I find that really reflective of this philosophy where you can step into the world and meet the music that is there and find inspiration from it, or you can continue to repeat the same sounds and hear things the same. And with Michael being someone who always was striving to create something new and innovate, again, something he spoke about very often, with Michael being someone like that, it makes sense why part of his creative philosophy was joining in and appreciating the universal music that already exists around us. Again, it's kind of like a hyper presence, which I know we've talked about in previous episodes related to different aspects of life. But this seems to require a hyper presence also. The choice to immerse, the choice to remain and listen and find the story, find the song. If it is true what Michael has said, in that full songs are deposited into his brain, that's really incredible. But I do also wonder how much of that is partly his humility and how he explains it. Either way, I believe his perspective entirely on this, and I do see it as a mark of genius. One of my favorite parts of this piece comes at the end when he says, "When you join the flow, the music is inside and outside, and both are the same." What this immediately made me think of is a person being almost translucent, or I don't know, I'm thinking like fish gills, something can breathe in and out of you like water. The idea that you can hear something outside and have it match exactly what you're hearing inside, and that is the state of creation. It's so fluid and it's so beautiful to imagine. This whole thing reminded me of the term or the concept of a flow state, and a flow state being when you're in that real groove of immersion in something, you're in a state of creative flow and energy. That's what this reminds me of. So when he ends with, "As long as I can listen to the moment, I'll always have music," this makes me think of the other noise that infiltrated Michael's life, and how hard that must have made life for him when it came to being a creator, when so much of his inspiration was kind of waiting to hear something. I just wonder, was this something like a process he had to feed? Did it just naturally happen? Could something else disrupt it, like stress, for example? Things he had to deal with around him all the time? I know that disrupts my creative process, but I am no Michael Jackson, so I just wonder. And on the flip side of that, he says it's like a river that you step into, and that makes me wonder, with there being a constant flow like a river would be, is it a choice to step in and access and hear the music, or is it something he can't really control? I guess what I mean is, could he turn that part of himself off if he wanted to? Or was he someone with a constant openness to inspiration? Of course he talked about writing in all different times and, inspiration coming at all different times, but was it something he could turn off? Was it ever disruptive in a negative way in his life? I just wonder, what was it like to be Michael Jackson with this particular approach and style to creation? I have so much more I could continue to say about this, but I feel like there is so much to admire about this and so much to consider when it comes to how we listen to Michael's music and how we appreciate it. Everything from his own hearing a song in his head to then beatboxing and making the sounds of the various instruments, and then writing the lyrics, and then of course singing the layers of harmony, the layers of song, the constant effort that went into creating this work. And he created timeless work, which is what's so exciting about it. There's a timelessness to Michael Jackson's music that I've not experienced very often with other artists. And it makes me grateful that someone who had such a gratitude and appreciation for this gift was, if we want to think about it this way, gifted songs that would be so appreciated by the greater world. and so memorable and timeless that they would go on to be appreciated from far beyond the measure of his own lifetime. I remember hearing a few different times that from different collaborators that Michael would sometimes just stop working and start praying in gratitude for what he had been given in terms of his gift, in terms of music. And I think that's really beautiful and to me very inspirational, because I'm not sure I've ever thanked, God or whoever. I'm not sure I've ever prayed in gratitude for my creativity. And this is part of the point of the whole piece to me, and Michael's philosophy as a whole, is that the ego of the artist seems much smaller, and it's more about tapping into the universal magic than it is about building claim about yourself as an artist. I don't know. I find it inspirational and very exciting. With that said, this has been a very long discussion of how Michael Jackson makes music. It's difficult for me because my mind races sometimes, and I try to speak off the cuff because, well, I like the spontaneity of it, but it certainly makes things difficult sometimes. But I hope that you enjoyed this discussion and understood some of the perspectives that I was trying to offer here. And again, I just want to celebrate this as the halfway point in Dancing the Dream, very intentionally so, I do believe. So we will continue next week with hopefully a more reasonable length episode than this one, but I look forward very much to returning to this book with you again next week to continue into the second half of Dancing the Dream. For now, I would like to close with playing a brief clip from the Mexico Deposition. Again, if you are not familiar, I highly recommend looking it up on YouTube. I will also include a link to it in the show notes and description for this week's episode. So with that said, I hope you enjoy this final clip, and I'll talk with you all soon.
I'd like to turn, Mr. Jackson, to generally how you write songs. Can you tell me what process you go through when you're writing a song, if there is a general process?
Well, the process I go through is songs kind of just come. They create themselves. Like I've said before, I'm just the source through which they come. And it's a beautiful thing. It's very spiritual. It's like standing under a tree and letting a leaf fall and trying to catch it. It's that beautiful. And what I do is it comes into my head. I could be walking along, on a road, or I could be sitting on a bench at Disneyland or something, eating peanuts, and there it is, it's in my head. Or I could be in the shower, or I can wake up, like when I did when I wrote We Are the World. And there the song is. It's right in my head. The entire composition, That's how it happens.